Yeah, the debate in light of the loss for Elias Lukwago did not lose because he's weak or unintelligent or even irrelevant. He lost because the political terrain shifted beneath his feet while the core strength remained largely unchanged. And if you contextualize this particular loss, then you would probably understand that Lukwago's loss was actually structural and not even personal. Lukwago is a constitutionalist and not even a populist. So elections today, especially urban ones, are increasingly driven by certain things like parliamentary machinery, mobilization networks, youth identity politics, emotions, symbolism, and even some kind of momentum. So one can argue that Lukwago's politics was basically built on what? On legal reasoning, on institutional memory, and even on procedural correctness, and even moral authority. And these are things that may not be very much within the ordinary voters in terms of takeaways. So these qualities do not easily translate into mass electoral energy, especially in a wave-dominated in light of Uganda today. So he was swimming against a political tide, not competing on equal waters, and that is something you must understand in light of this loss. He was actually outpaced by the movement's logic in terms of contemporary politics. You could argue and say that recent Uganda elections, particularly in Kampala, are no longer about individual merit, but they are about party color, for example. They are about collective anger. They are about protest swinging or protest voting in terms of that. And so we see them. So it's a question of we versus them, the question of we versus them framing. So Lukwago ran as a man of conscience and continuity in a season that actually rewarded rupture and even rebellion. So in simple terms, you could argue and say that he actually offered governance when the electorate actually wanted resistance. And that is something you must understand in terms of the contextualization of the debate that we are having for Lukwago's loss. And this mismatch actually has a lot of resonance in terms of the dispensation of the political terrain that we have today. His greatest strength obviously comes from the electoral weaknesses in terms of arguing that Lukwago is too principled to posture. That is something you must understand. And also too legally disciplined to inflame crowds. And also you could also argue that also too institutional in terms of playing recklessness politics. He has that strictness, if you like. Ironically, this made him appear an older order in that perspective, and insufficiently radical, and therefore less emotionally resonant with the generations that are raised on immediacy. And that is something you must understand in terms of the political dispensation of what's happening today as far as the debacle is concerned. So none of these are actually leadership failures. They're actually electoral disadvantages in a populist movement. So someone would argue in terms of that. We could also argue that the Kampala voter was actually voting against, not for, not in light of for, but it's a question of rebellion of sort. So many votes were under, an endorsement of alternatives. They were actually protest votes, as you like. They were party-aligned votes, if you like. They were emotionally driven votes, if you like. And in such elections, then you understand why the debate becomes extremely difficult for the likes of my esteemed brother Lukwago. His track record actually did not matter at this point. Integrity did not matter at this point. Institutional memory matters least when it comes to such dispensations in the likes of the debates that they're having. So Lukwago represented experience and restraint, and two things rarely rewarded in protest cycles. And those are things you cannot argue when it comes to political correctness in terms of what's happening in the country today. So what Lukwago actually is best suited for in terms of the debate, you could argue that this is part of what many miss. Yeah, Lukwago is not built for perpetual electoral combat. Yeah, he is actually built for national institutional stewardship. Yeah, and if you could also argue that his true calling basically lies in, for example, issues to do with constitutionalism, good lawyerism, for example, and he understands the Constitution as a lived reality, not even as a theory. And perhaps those are strengths that he could capture on. He has actually fought the state on many fronts and understands its excesses. He commands respect even across political divides. And so these are things that you could argue in terms of what, Lukwago could become. He is a chief constitutional advisor, a national ombudsman of sorts. So he's the defender of legality. He's a guardian of institutional restraint. And these are things that you could argue in terms. He's a voice of reason in moments of state overreach. And he's a senior statesman when it comes to post-partisan aspects and stuff like that. Think about people like Mandela after prison, not Mandela the rebel, but the likes of that, the unfairness, or the not the mobilizer, the unifier, not the mobilizer, the conscience of the republic. Uganda is desperately short of men who actually understand law in a moral architecture, and Lukwago is one of those few men in terms of that debate. So you must understand, as a final takeaway in terms of the debate of Lukwago's loss, you could argue without sugarcoating that Lukwago lost the election, but he has not lost relevancy. What failed was electoral translation and not leadership substance. And this is something that you must understand as a debate. And so I hope that settles the matter in terms of my esteemed brother, the Honorable Lukwago. Thank you and God bless you.